Record. Okay, I finally have Amy Puzey on the show today. We connected a few months ago and finally got her to come share her story on the podcast because I think it's an important one to share. So thanks, Amy, for coming along and meeting with our endurance world, fit and healthy clients that are health optimizers.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah. So where are you located? You're up north.
Yeah, we're in Vermeer, BC. So it's 3 hours from the border, but it's definitely winter here.
Inland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fellow Canadian, I'm still Canadian citizen, even though I moved from Vancouver, Canada when I was 13. So it's a few years ago, but still love to say I'm Canadian. I
Well,
wanted
it's
to,
a lot nicer there than it is here right now.
well, yeah, we call it the sunshine tax. So we moved to San Diego from Seattle almost about 3.5 years ago, but the cost of living is the taxes are higher in California for a reason, I
Yeah.
guess. So I want to talk about athletic performance. I'm all about fueling, training, figuring out how to perform your best. But as I get older and as a practitioner, I'm all about figuring out ways we can improve health. And that starts with the gut.
Mm.
So what we're eating, how we're eating, when, why, all of that, but how we can break food down to get the nutrients and focus on choosing nutrient dense whole foods. But it all comes down to, I think, so much of digestion and absorption and our gut health. So we're going to talk about your story and a little more about anti-nutrients. So let's just dive into who you are and what's your why on this journey. We're going to talk about phytates.
Sure. Yeah, my why for this is probably related to wanting to help the 2 to 3 billion people worldwide that are micronutrient deficient. And that's typically people that are living in poverty. So that can be anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be just in developing countries. That can be happening in North America with kids that are eating cereal in the morning, macaroni at lunch, and pizza for dinner. It's just really nutrient poor foods. So sometimes you'll get obesity from that, and then sometimes you'll get wasting and stenting and death related to micronutrient deficiencies. So that's sort of been the focus of my research since 2008. And then starting the company in 2019 was a little bit of a different angle, but that was the main reason for starting it, was to try to prevent the deaths of women and children, and specifically children under 5, because it's just such a high mortality rate related to micronutrient deficiency.
So the death rate is related to micronutrient deficiencies and specific ones, or?
Yeah, so zinc alone kills 500,000 people every year, just zinc deficiencies. And then iron is about 840,000 deaths per year related to iron deficiency. And a lot of that is because you're just not able to absorb it, which we'll get into around phytate. But when you're eating foods that are high in phytate, you can't absorb those micronutrients. And then that then leads to compromised immunity and all sorts of other issues related to those micronutrients, because they're just so critical to our overall health, our immune system, our ability to make hormones, and pretty much every enzymatic reaction that happens in our body is micronutrient driven. So
yeah, people don't usually think about micronutrients. It's all about macros, your protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And really, it's about breaking those foods down and to get, say, protein into the amino acids, but then it's all those cofactors too. And the minerals we want to look at, the iron, zinc, calcium, all those micronutrients that people forget about, and they don't often know that they're low in them. So how do you know if you're deficient?
Well, I mean, an easy one is to get a blood test, obviously. So for athletes especially, and anyone who runs, I'm sure you've spoken about this on the podcast, but the foot strike hemolysis that happens when every time your foot hits the ground, the blood vessels in your feet break, and that creates an iron deficiency. So women are obviously worse off because of menstruation. But sweating can deplete your iron, and then that same foot strike hemolysis can deplete iron as well. So it's really common for runners or triathletes, or anybody that runs at all to have an iron deficiency. And so you probably notice things like you just really severe fatigue, inability to be able to like pick up the pace in your runs, or inability to focus or concentrate. And so, yeah, I would suggest like definitely going to your doctor, or, you know, getting your micronutrients tested to see what you're deficient in. But yeah, magnesium, I mean, cramping related to magnesium, sleep issues related to magnesium deficiency. Obviously, calcium is stuff like osteoporosis. And then zinc is really like your whole immune system. I'd say it's one of the most critical micronutrients. And actually, phytate impacts amino acid absorption as well. So when we talk about macronutrients, you can't even absorb the amino acids when phytate is present in your gut. So it's a really lethal part of plants that can really do a lot of damage to your body.
So let's backtrack, because I kind of got right into the nutrients and micronutrients and symptoms I want to get back into. But let's rewind and talk about how you got into this, because as an athlete, you were a runner. Talk about your story, what led you to be focusing on anti-nutrients and phytate and creating an enzyme to help break it down.
So I went to university for nursing, and then I switched into nutrition because I just felt like I could have a greater impact on the preventative side of health than working in hospitals, where people often didn't even know what medications they were on, right? And it just felt so frustrating to be in that area. Not that there isn't a place for hospitals and medicine, but I just wanted to work on the other side of it. So I was running for the team at U of A, and then after university, I had my twins, and then I continued to compete, started getting into more like 50Ks, ultras, Trans Rockies Run, that type of thing, marathons. And I think as I went, I just realized how it was sort of a secret weapon to understand nutrition. But back in 2008, I came across some research related to phytate and phytase, and I hadn't learned about it in any of my nutrition training. And I was like, what is that? Like, how do people not know that this anti-nutrient is leaching all these nutrients out of their body, and how critical those are to the immune system? So I started research around it, and kind of just started developing a theory. We had a trial with Canadian Trials Network, a protocol developed with them. But because I was from outside of the organization, it was difficult to get funding. And so then I bought 5 Peaks, which is a national trail running race series up in Canada. So we had 25 races across Canada that I was in charge of, race directors in each area. But I had been a trail runner since I was 14. But I ran that business for a while, sold it in 2021. But right before the pandemic hit, I sort of put all of this research on the back burner just because I didn't know what to do with it. And then in 2019, someone gave me a book called What Do You Do with an Idea? And it just felt like this second, download, or like a punch in the face. Like, you need to do something about this. You can't have this information and not bring it to the world. And I still couldn't understand how nobody was bringing it forward. So I did. I just made a product. I made a website, commercialized it, and then it was essentially right around pandemic time that it all kind of kicked off.
Wow.
And so and then we just started hearing like amazing stories from people with anemia, and then surprisingly with autoimmune disease that started responding really quickly to taking phytase. They would essentially just stop flaring almost immediately within starting it, even if they were not responding to some of the really big immunosuppressant drugs that they were on. And so then that led down another path of like, what is going on with this enzyme? So we're deep into research around autoimmunity right now. But it's commercially available on the market. So
Let's go back to basics a little bit. What are anti-nutrients?
So anti-nutrients are the plant defense. So it's the way that the plant will protect itself from being eaten before it has a chance to sprout. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the book Plant Paradox. And so they discuss specifically lectins and molecular mimicry and autoimmunity related to lectins. And my focus is on phytate. So phytate is the anti-nutrient that is present on all beans, grains, nuts, and seeds, and any food made from that. So peanut butter, nut butter, or almond butter, pizza, pasta, crackers, flours of any kind, anything. They've all got those anti-nutrients on them. And it's the way the plant's protecting itself. And so until you can break that outer shell, that phytate down, it's going to bind to those micronutrients in your body or chelate really strongly and pull them out of your body so you can't absorb them. So if you have any phytate in your gut at all, so if you've eaten half a bowl of macaroni, then it's going to prevent your body from absorbing those micronutrients out of your diet. And it actually impacts the endogenous pools of micronutrients in your body as well. So those are even bigger than anything you could ever eat in food. So it's really really sneaky the way the plant can attack you from the inside.
Well, that's why so many people talk about carnivore and being carnivore cure. Judy Cho, nutritional therapy practitioner, has her carnivore cure program, and it makes sense to do a strict elimination diet and then reintroduce food, see how you feel. But it seems, people go to the extreme that think avoiding all plant foods is a solution. But I was just listening to a podcast yesterday actually about how having things heal your gut and then have things sometimes, I think is when people have all these foods every day, is the spinach and kale and, the high oxalate, lectins, phytates, everything that's overwhelming the system. But if you do elimination diet, figure out, okay, I feel better, fix the gut, and then reintroduce those foods so you have them sometimes. And then when do you add in supplementation? As we'll talk about your product, you created this phytase that helps break it down.
Yeah.
So I think, do you think kind of order of operations where people should start? Okay, let's start first is, what are the symptoms? What are the red flags? Something's wrong. You feel like you mentioned fatigue, focus issues. You talk about people with IBS, IBD, anemia, autoimmune. So symptoms, and then what's the next step? So we've something's not right. I feel off.
Yeah. So a lot of it is related to inflammation. In autoimmune diseases, often there's like a virus will trigger it. And so the body sends cytokines in for acute inflammation to try to deal with that virus or the bacteria or whatever the foreign invader is, right? But what happens is the body turns on that inflammation, and then sometimes it just doesn't get turned off. So the inflammation is just going on. So like in COVID, the cytokine storm is what was actually killing people. So these cytokines were going and they were just attacking the body, right? So attacking the lungs and the organs. So it's inflammation that's just chronically on and never getting turned off. And so phytase is a phosphatase enzyme that can turn off that inflammatory process. So without getting too deep into science, there's kinases and phosphatases, and one turns them on and one turns them off. And so it's cellular signaling that is happening on a really deep biochemical level here. And I do just want to clarify, though, that eating plant-based foods can be really good for you. So phytate, IP6, it can be really good for you because it's an inositol molecule with phosphate in it. And you need phosphate for ATP, you need it for DNA, all really important. You just need to be able to break it down. So it's not that eating plant-based foods is bad. And I'm an omnivore, so I eat everything. Yeah. But you have to know how to treat it. And so traditional ways of preparing grains, for example, would have been like a fermentation process, lactofermentation. We would have probably thousands of years ago, we wouldn't have had antibiotics, right? So our gut hasn't been destroyed by those antibiotics, and the microbiome hadn't been destroyed. But also all those fermented foods that we had in our diet were actually helping our guts to produce small amounts of phytase, but the bacteria was healthy in there. So you didn't have leaky gut syndrome, you didn't have proteins leaking out, which then could trigger autoimmune reactions because of molecular mimicry. So it's just sort of where we are now, the way we prepare our foods. We're eating convenience foods. We're eating everything that's, nobody wants to sprout their beans or sprout their seeds or have all these jars all over their counter. And that's part of why I made this supplement, because it's really difficult to break down phytate. But plant foods aren't bad. It's just, you just have to be able to break that down, to dephosphorylate the phytate.
Well, that's what I was trying to get to, that the podcast I was listening to is Dr. William Davis, who wrote The Wheat Belly and wrote Super Gut. And I was going back, says researching gut inflammation, but he was saying the same thing, that it's not, plants are bad. It's just having a healthy gut and eating the fermented foods and having good bacteria. We've destroyed our gut over the years and how we need to repair it, but it's more the why can't you digest that and fixing that problem. Not that those foods are bad, it's just fixing what's going on in your body to figure out, okay, why can I tolerate that a bit too? So what I want to go into the phytate, we talked about that, the phytase. So that's the enzyme to break down the phytic acid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's just the way that it picks off the phosphate groups, and then it can't bind to all those micronutrients and pull them out of your body. But it's also got that other function of being a phosphatase enzyme that can turn off that inflammation.
Yeah, it's always the word chronic. Everything's okay, acute, but when you say chronic inflammation or anything chronic, I always have to say, the Goldilocks effect, everything is just good in a small doses, but when you have anything happen too much, inflammation is normal, but when it doesn't turn off. So it's just figuring out how to turn it off.
Well, and it's just like, there's lots of anti-inflammatories out there. Turmeric's a great one too, omega-3s. But it's a matter of being able to kind of put the fires out in your body. So inflammation is like having fire going in your body all the time, right? And it's just on. And that's where you end up with a lot of different conditions.
So that goes back to the symptoms. So if people are kind of feeling off, they have different symptoms, as you talked about. Is that more you're speaking to the IBS or IBD, autoimmune anemia, or fatigue?
We've heard everything from customers that have responded and said, like, I haven't slept in years because my leg cramps are so bad at night. And that's typically a magnesium deficiency. But even if they take magnesium, if they're not absorbing it, it doesn't matter, right? So you're just putting these vitamins in your body, but your body can't absorb them because phytate's preventing that absorption. Yeah, definitely IBS. So bloating, constipation, diarrhea, indigestion, all of that can be related to enzymes, or to phytate kind of disturbing the gut. Zinc deficiency is typically skin issues or really impaired immunity. So if you're getting sick often, it could be related to zinc deficiency. Like I said, in developing countries, children die under the age of 5 often because of a zinc deficiency, and that leads to diarrhea or pneumonia. So what else? Calcium obviously is really important for a number of functions in your body, but controlling osteoporosis or keeping that at bay, you want to be able to absorb the calcium out of your food versus having to supplement with it. Yeah, and then amino acids, critically important, right? Like to absorb the proteins. And new research around phytate impacting vitamin D absorption as well, which is especially up here in Canada, like because we don't get a lot of sun, really important to supplement with that if you're not getting it from the sunshine.
So you're saying that could be related, low vitamin D levels, because you're not getting from your nutrients from your food. Right. So you could show up. Wow. So phytates, how do you know if it's lectins or oxalates, phytates? You know, it seems I always have to look at my list of which one's which, but how do you know if it's phytates or if it's the lectins or the oxalates? They're all anti-nutrients.
Yeah, and I haven't, I mean, most of my research has been around phytate. I did read Plant Paradox, and that makes a lot of sense. It ties into a lot of research I was doing. There's a book called The Paleo Diet for Athletes by Loren Cordain. And he focused a lot on lectins and autoimmunity. So lectins basically act, the molecular mimicry is that they make themselves look like your body. And so your body attacks itself instead of this foreign protein. It's really fascinating how it can do it, but I mean, it's hard to know. I'm not as familiar with oxalates, but lectins and phytates for sure. Lectins, I don't think have the same binding capacity to the micronutrients. I think their mechanism is more around molecular mimicry.
So you're saying phytates it's not just iron and zinc, but it's magnesium, it's just all micronutrients.
Yeah, so the biggest ones are zinc, iron, calcium, magnesium, amino acids, and vitamin D.
So that's just amazing, right? I mean, that's probably why you got so excited to create a new business to go follow your purpose, but you get this information like, what? Why doesn't everyone know this? Everyone should know this information.
Well, and that's what I can't quite understand, because it's widely used in agriculture, mainly to help animals absorb phosphate so that it doesn't go into soil runoff and end up in the water and produce algae blooms. And there is a lot of human research on phytase, but just nobody that has actually brought a product to market in a high dose. So, and you really need those higher doses to be able to completely break down all that phytate in your diet. Unless you're eating just like a pure carnivore diet, then you're getting phytate in your diet. And that's probably why we're seeing, like when you talk about gut healing, we've had 7 people with inflammatory bowel disease. I think 2 of them are in complete remission. One of them has no more disease left in their body, and we're waiting for results or feedback from other people. But they have had complete mucosal healing from going from not being able to leave the house without an adult diaper on, and 8 pills of prednisone per day, and Humira, which is an immunosuppressant, that still wasn't working. Quit their job, had no money, couldn't leave the house. I tried every diet on the planet, and literally 2 weeks after starting this, his flares stopped completely, and after 6 months, he was in remission.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So are you familiar with different types of autoimmune diseases that they would have side effects because of their digestion and how that's connected to autoimmune? I mean, you said the molecular mimicry, but usually we talk about gluten, and that can cause like thyroid, Hashimoto's. But what type, anything more you can dive into on the autoimmune part of it connection?
So there isn't a ton of research on phytase and autoimmunity, because like, as far as we can tell, we're the first ones kind of looking into this. So obviously multiple sclerosis there could be implications for that, where it attacks the myelin sheath around the nerves. Hashimoto's, we have had a few case studies there where there was resolution within 4 to 6 weeks. And I haven't heard from anyone that has lupus. I know asthma is an autoimmune, which I have asthma, so I didn't actually know that was autoimmune. I've had just fitness-induced asthma for most of my life. But most of the feedback we've had has been around inflammatory bowel disease, and then oddly enough, type 1 diabetes. So again, it's about 7 people that have been able to reduce their insulin use by up to 85% when they take phytase. And we have no idea why that's happening. I don't know we don't know if it's insulin sensitization or it's doing something to slow the body's attack on the islet cells, which are the insulin producing cells in the body. I mean, we need like billions of dollars of research on this, and as many minds on it as possible and as many different clinical studies as possible. But we just, right now, we're focusing on inflammatory bowel disease, just because we had to pick one area and we don't have unlimited funds to do research.
So if someone has irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel disease, they have a lot of runny stool, or they have the opposite, constipation. They have the need to fix with what they're eating and how they're eating it, breaking it down. So this would help. And then where does fixing the gut part and then the mucosal barrier come in, leaky gut? I mean,
so we can't say definitively that phytase is fixing the leaky gut. Knowing that these IBD clients have had, or customers have had, complete mucosal healing is pretty significant.
With any other protocol part of that, or is it just taking this?
Just, the only thing they changed was taking the phytase. So yeah, and that, again, like, people had tried all sorts of diets and nothing was working. So so it's really hard to say what it's doing. One of our chief scientific advisors is huge in microbiome research at the University of Calgary. So he has some theories around what might be happening, but until we move into the human studies, which we're doing in the next few months, we won't have the exact mechanism of action. So hopefully we can figure that out, what's happening. But right now I just have theories around it. So
yeah, I just been looking at clients' labs. I just had 3 new gut tests back, and everyone has super elevated LPS, endotoxicity, and signs of mucosal barrier damage. And so it's almost like, okay, why is everyone having, I swear, if you test everyone, I'm sure 99% of everyone has some gut inflammation, and that's eating the standard American diet, or just maybe because we're a combination of stressed out when we're eating on the go, we're not properly in parasympathetic nervous system state when we're eating, and just being slower paced. But is it,
well, I know I've heard a number of podcasts now on glyphosates. So Roundup being sprayed on food, the desiccant. And what glyphosate does is, because the mucosal barrier in your gut is like 1 cell thick, it actually can create junctions in your gut. And so it's poking holes in your gut, which is then allowing proteins to leak out. So I'm not an expert on glyphosates, but I have heard quite a few podcasts on that. So I think that could be one of the culprits in leaky guts, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, if food is stuck in your gut and it's fermenting and you're not having a bowel movement at least once a day, and it's just kind of all sitting in there and rotting, that can cause leaky gut. Like, there's so many things that can cause that. But definitely when the proteins are getting out of the gut when they're not supposed to be, it can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, and then it goes back to, athletes and recovery and repair and performance, how we want to focus on nutrient density, getting the most out of the meals that we have to help our body heal and repair, and so we can challenge it again. That nutrition is so important part of all this. And if you're choosing foods you think that are healthy, but they're not so healthy, and maybe they are healthy, but you're not breaking them down, so that this would help them in their performance part, recovery.
Yeah, so one of the sports med docs that's involved with us, another ultra runner in Canmore, he noticed, like, and we've heard this before, but he'd go do a huge mountain workout, 3 peaks or something, and the next day would feel completely recovered. And he's like, what is going on with this? Like, I don't know how I'm recovering so quickly from these massive workouts that would normally, like, trash me for 3 or 4 days,
But wouldn't that be what they're eating, taking that with their food? Because you can't just take it and get that by eating crappy food. So you're going to take a supplement by eating Wendy's or McDonald's or something, that they have to choose the best food first, and then take this with it. I assume you're saying, right?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't want to be eating crappy food at all, but it's tough when you're spending so much time on your nutrition and getting it all right, and you're still not feeling great, or you're still not recovering, or you've still got these other issues. and you spend a lot of time and money trying to dial in your nutrition, right? Or you see people who, I don't know, in ultras, this happens all the time where they train and train and train, and then the day of the race, they have all sorts of gut issues, right? And they end up with vomiting, or they're in the bathroom the whole time. So I think there's still a misconception that athletes need massive amounts of carbs, and it's really important to differentiate between paleo carbs, which are like fruit and vegetables and nuts and seeds, and neocarbs, which are the grains that have been in our diet, but only since the advent of agriculture, which is only like 8 to 10,000 years ago. So our body genetically is not adapted to be able to consume those foods, right? And especially now that we're not even fermenting them or breaking them down properly. So it's just, yeah, it's just causing all sorts of problems.
So go into, again, what foods are commonly eaten by athletes that are high in phytic acid.
So for sure, like pasta, breads, nut butters, beans, lentils.
Yeah.
Pretty much any plant food will have it, but it's mostly the beans, grains, nuts, and seeds. So even rice, brown rice has more phytate than white rice because it's still got the bran on it. And that's where all the phytate is contained.
Yeah. So then take that, and what are common meals athletes are having? You know, I just read this Dr. Stacy Sims post on women need to eat before their workouts, shouldn't do it fasted. They need to have some carbs and protein. And then they said, put your favorite pre-workout meal in there. And I kept reading it, and it was peanut butter on bread and honey. And so it just seems like most common workout meals traditionally for endurance athletes are going to be using all those, as you're saying, phytates. People think they're doing themselves a good job eating all those breads and nut butters, but they backfire without knowing it.
And it's really fascinating. Like in 9 years of being a nutritionist, every time I would take somebody off of grain and dairy. So I'd say, just try this for 2 weeks. And they'd be like, I can't, I'm going to die. What am I going to do without grains?
Yeah.
I can't get rid of dairy. I take them off grain and dairy, and it was shocking, like how quickly their energy went up and how lean they got so fast, and how their performance went up. And they're like, how is this possible? I'm not eating carbs. You're still eating carbs. You're just eating a different kind of carbs, right? So you're eating more leafy greens or lightly steamed grains, or you're eating fruit or sweet potatoes, or you're eating soaked chickpeas, or, you're still eating carbs. It's just not those neocarbs, the grains. Because when you look back in the fossil record, all the diseases of civilization started right with the advent of agriculture. So it's really interesting to look at, yes, it provided a lot of food for people, but it also caused a lot of damage to our health.
So let's talk about people eat those foods, proper preparation of all the anti-nutrient foods, the plant foods, the lectins, phytates, oxalates all seem to be the same. You have to properly, fermented foods, but then soaking and sprouting. That's why I tend to just avoid them, because it's a lot of work.
Exactly. And there's so many health benefits to eating them, but that's why I've made this product, so that you can take phytase, still consume those foods, and it's actually going to break down the anti-nutrients, right?
Yeah. So if you want to eat them, not have gut damage or anti-nutrients, but a lot of people seem to get your gut irritation from a lot of the wheat, gluten containing foods. Nuts and seeds can irritate a lot of people's guts if they already have damaged gut. But then if we want to take them, number one, you should properly prepare them. So soaking and sprouting nuts and seeds. What else are you supposed to do? It's like,
so cooking can get rid of some of the phytate. Soaking and sprouting can get rid of some of the phytate, but it won't completely degrade it. But yeah, if you want to do it like that, then there's different fermentation times or soaking times for all the different beans, nuts, and seeds. So you literally have to have either pick one and just eat that and have a mono diet, or you'd have jars all over your counter that are constantly fermenting. All of these.
But it doesn't work for me. That's why I was interested in your product. But also it goes back, I always think of the 4-day rotation diet that I learned about nutritional therapy that Paul Chek would always talk about too, is don't have the same food every day. That's a good way to start. Don't
Right.
have the kale spinach smoothie every day, but mix up what you're having
Mhm.
is a good way to start. Properly prepare food, pick nutrient dense whole foods, eat your food in a parasympathetic nervous system state. So take, I always say to clients, take 3 long inhale, exhale, reset. Because I think no matter what you do, if you're eating in a rushed go, 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 I gotta get back to work, or I gotta go here and do this, or just it's an
Yeah.
inconvenience to eat, that you are in sympathetic, I think that would interfere with everything, all efforts.
Well, and actually, even if you don't chew your food properly,
Yeah,
amylase enzymes in your mouth that
or not.
that's secreted when you chew your food, they'll break down the starch. But if you're just inhaling your food while you're driving and you're stressed and the kids are screaming in the back, and then it's going to end up in your gut not properly digested without that amylase in it. And then of course you're going to be bloated, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to eat in a relaxed state, but also really like you have to chew your food. You have to slow down and like pay attention to what you're eating.
Well, that's why I always think of the what you're eating, when, why, how, where is
Mhm.
important to start with. Like you can try all these different things, but let's just make sure you're eating nutrient-dense, real whole foods in season, and then properly digest it and break it down. Because if you're not, it's like defeats the whole purpose of all the effort to choose good food. And if you're trying to be an athlete and improve your performance and recovery and repair, and hopefully, as I keep talking in every show, longevity, we want to be taking care of our guts so we can have a better future self.
Yeah.
I think is important.
Well, yeah, and it's really interesting that people sometimes, will eat a meal with the intent of getting energy from that meal, right? That's how we all like, okay, food's going to
Mm,
give me energy.
yeah.
But how many people, I'm sure you've seen this, they eat and then they want to have like a nap after lunch, right? They're exhausted
Yeah.
and digestion takes 70% of our energy.
Wow.
So if you're eating food that you have to work really hard to digest and there are no enzymes in there to help you with that. So all like protease, amylase, lipase, like there's all sorts of different enzymes. Um, but if your liver's not working and there's no bile going into your stomach and you have hypochlorhydria and you therefore can't digest fats and proteins, you're going to feel awful every time you eat, right? You're just going to be like wiped out. So your food you're eating, but it's not giving you the energy that you want it to. It's not. So what's the point of eating that food if it's just going to wipe you out,
So
do you
true.
see that? I used to see it all the time.
Yeah.
Like people were they want to have a nap. They
Hmm.
desk after lunch and have a nap after eating like fettuccine for lunch.
Well, that's what when I do my intake forms with clients, I use our Nutritional Therapy Association has a great program called NutriQ, and it has the signs and symptoms are my book. Oh, my computer's on top of my book. And it's 309 questions, and they're all correlated to gut function, small intestine, large intestine, liver, pancreas, and all that stuff. So it's always interesting asking people, how do you feel after you eat? Yeah, it's a big one. So with that, do people need to take a digestive enzyme and have an HCl to help their stomach acid and take this together, like a good combination supplement, or just take your supplement is called, you can talk about what it's called and what's in it, but what should we do to digest our food properly and get the nutrients?
Yeah, so definitely eating in a parasympathetic state, chewing properly, having a probiotic in there to help keep everything moving in your gut. That's really important. Gut brain connection is huge. The vagus nerve literally goes from your gut right up to your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all the nutrients that fuel that. I personally take a broad spectrum digestive enzyme, and I often recommend that to clients because a lot of people don't have the enzymes to break down the nutrients in their food. Or, for example, if they're eating dairy, if it's been pasteurized and homogenized, then all the enzymes in that dairy product, they're all dead, right? So then you can't break down the lactose in it. So then
Mm-hmm.
it causes all sorts of problems with people. Or protease, so that's protein, lipase is for fats. So I always suggest people take a broad spectrum digestive enzyme. And if you're having trouble with digesting proteins and fats, then sometimes that can be a sign of hypochlorhydria, and you would need something like papain, which is from papaya enzyme, or betaine, which is hydrochloric acid, but it's often from an animal source. So
I was just laughing because we were in Hawaii and I was talking to Sean Wells, had a post on this on pineapple and papaya. And I don't eat fruit a lot here, just in season if I feel like it, but I don't intuitively don't want it. But if I go to Hawaii, I'm having papaya and pineapple every day. And then having it with goat yogurt. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I was saying how my gut was just, everything was working better. I'll just say that. But it was just so funny. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot the enzymes in papaya are amazing in the pineapple. I was saying that.
Yeah, the seeds of the papaya are so high in papain. They're really spicy, but you sprinkle them on a salad.
Yeah,
and
someone
you
told me
are
that.
digesting that food.
I always throw them out as I always scoop it out. I'm like, gosh, there's no papaya left here. It's all seeds. But then I'm learning I'm supposed to eat those seeds too.
Yeah.
So, and also I want to add into talking about the gut brain connection and the vagal nerve. We talked a lot about that on the show over the years, but the heart rate variability, just to note on there, that's how it's a great way to tell another sign and symptom if you are having gut issues, digestion, and sympathetic dominance, is looking at your HRV as the Oura ring, but how that can be related to gut dysfunction if your vagal nerve. Have you ever looked into that? And gut
I
health?
haven't. That would probably be more of a Dr. Hirota question, our scientific advisor. He's an expert in microbiome, but that's not, yeah, definitely not my field of expertise.
I always like to look at all the data and correlate, like, all right, if I'm having, well, people can analyze your poop if they're having poor fat digestion. You're not digesting your food right, just look in your poop. And then looking at your Oura ring or your Whoop, if you're using heart rate variability testing to get an idea if you ate something, and your resting heart rate will be higher. If you're reacting to a food, your heart rate variability is better to have higher number, but if it drops and if you have your heart rate our heart rate goes up, something's on in your body. But I always find that interesting to correlate, okay, did I have some foods that I'm reacting to and I'm not having good digestion or my body's under stress?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that about the heart rate variability.
Well, you said the gut brain connection, that vagal nerve, that's how you can measure. I think heart rate variability is a good part of that to measure it. So I always think it's fascinating. And then to look at the low frequency and high frequency, if you can get heart rate variability testing with a chest strap, that's more accurate than these Oura rings, and then see real time what's going on. But I think that's just stressors in your body. Just another source of stress is if you're not digesting your food. So if you have chronic stress issues, it could be that internal stress, not just external stress.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. But I think it's interesting to look at, if you're not feeling your best, to investigate, figure out what's the why, and then work backwards, as we're saying, what you're eating, how you're eating, the when, and then work on, okay, what could you do to improve digestion of that? If you don't want to properly prepare that food, here's another option. So talk about what your product is that you are working with.
Yeah, so it's called GoodPhyte, PHYTE, because of the phytase. So we have one that's GoodPhyte IB Defense. So for anybody with gut-related issues, like anything, constipation, diarrhea, IBD, IBS, bloating, all of those. And it's surprising how many people stay at home, won't leave the house because they feel so gross, distended, bloated. I don't want to go out. That feeling after you eat, or by the end of the day, you're super bloated. So that one would be for gut health. And then the other product we have is GoodPhyte Immunity. And so this one's got low levels of iron and zinc in it, along with the same high dose of phytase. So the reason for the low iron and zinc is because the phytase helps you absorb so much of it and absorb it from your endogenous pools that you don't need the RDA of those nutrients. So we wanted to go with just a low dose to make sure that people were getting it. So if you're anemic, you choose this one. If you're getting sick often, you choose this one. If you're essentially any autoimmune condition, you'd want to be probably choosing this, or a combination of both. We have a pure phytase product that's just phytase, but we're slowly starting to phase that out and replacing it with these two. So
And those are powdered and capsules?
These are just capsules.
Capsules.
So for my kids, some people can't swallow capsules, and I just open them and sprinkle it on their food. So it's got a little bit of a salty flavor. So I usually put it on their eggs. But yeah, it can be really helpful for kids too, because they're often nutrient deficient, and that can lead to all sorts of issues too, right?
Well, as we always say, I always say test, not guess. And I think it's getting your blood chemistry panel done with your doctor, but then work with a health practitioner, functional medicine doctor that actually will read it in optimal ranges versus normal, because I just got more blood work this week and it's just the ranges drive me nuts. And it's just, I put it into our functional medicine spreadsheet and then I can look at what's high and low. So alkaline phosphate is what you want to look at for zinc deficiencies. Get your iron panel, look at ferritin and calcium and magnesium. Blood serum is not the best I've heard, but also like a hair tissue mineral analysis is another way to get your minerals checked on there. And then a micronutrient test is also, as you're talking about, a good way. But if people can get your insurance to cover your blood chemistry panel, just look at what the functional ranges are, not normal. We want to be optimal, not just that. And that can be when it's higher or lower than that, that gives us clues to what might be imbalance in your body and what is out of not functioning right. So you're dysfunctioning. So we want to be figuring out that why. And that's why I think it's not just take, oh, I better take zinc or I better take iron, but then still work on why are you low when you're eating all this nutrient dense food. So going back to what you're talking about, let's break the food down properly and then not have these anti-nutrients in our diet as much.
Well, and it's really interesting when you talk about optimal levels. So Meredith Edwards is a very competitive runner. She was essentially bedridden with anemia, and her ferritin was at a 4, I think. And they couldn't figure out what was going on with her. She kept going for infusions, and iron would kind of bump up and then drop again, and then bump up and then drop again. And she had been on a number of courses of antibiotics while she was racing in Europe, and just felt like maybe that was something that was contributing to where she was. So she and I spoke, and she started taking phytase, and a few months later she was like out of bed and crushing course records.
Wow.
So, and I think she had one more infusion after that, but she's been able to come off iron supplements and phytase as well, and her iron is still stays high. So her ferritin's upwards of 100, I think. Optimal for an athlete is at least 50, right? So there's so many women, like myself included, who at times in my life, like, why do I feel so awful? And then you're like, right, I should probably check my iron, right? Yeah. Like a 4 or a 6 and just feeling terrible, and you can't think clearly and can't run properly and nothing's working. So it's really important to keep an eye on that.
Well, that's why I love what I do now as a nutritional therapy practitioner and an FDN practitioner, is looking at the why. And now I'm in Wild Health Fellowship 6-month course that we go into precision medicine, looking at genetics and blood chemistry. So to me, it's so fascinating, but it's just looking at, as I said, what's going on, but why, and go more root cause medicine, digging deeper. And so many people don't do that. And then I get frustrated on social media that all these leaders are saying, here's my supplement protocol. It's like, that's what you are taking because that's what you need. That doesn't mean everyone should be doing your personalized protocol for your health. So I think we need to remember you are unique, test and not guess, and figure out what you should do based on your investigation, working with a practitioner that is taking the time, hours looking at it. And if not, do what you're talking about, Amy, just adding that in, see how you feel, looking at what you're eating, and then maybe take this. Do you take it with the meal or right before, or is there protocol?
No, you can do both. If you take it on an empty stomach, it's a systemic enzyme, so it's more systemic. If it's with a meal, it's more digestive enzyme. So
That's right. So just note for people there, if you take it with food, it digests food, but away from it, it helps proteolytic enzymes that help with inflammation. I used to always do that. If you have injury, I would always do that. Surgeries, take it away from food. So that's a good little tip. So where can people learn more, follow you, and try it out? They feel like, oh my gosh, she's talking about me.
Yeah. So Instagram, it's Join the Good Fight, or good.fight. And then our website is goodphyte.com, and you can order it all on there. It's also available on Amazon now. So if you have Prime shipping, you can get it tomorrow.
What are your, see, Prime, everyone who needs to be Prime. What are your goals coming up this year? Are you trying to next year, 2 years, get it into more places, or what's
Yeah,
your
so
agenda?
we're currently raising money to do the human clinical trials that we've got coming up. And so those will be really big because that'll prove exactly what's happening. And, you know, we've had all these case studies, but we need to actually do the clinical study to prove it. So definitely getting through those, systematic review. We're going to try to get it into some nonprofit organizations like Doctors Without Borders to get it to people who need it that way. Working with someone in Ghana to do a study on women who are anemic in northern Ghana. And yeah, just trying to get it out to more people that need it. Just
Wow.
with a limited startup budget, we're doing our best to just get the word out there.
Well,
Just 'cause it's helped so many people, we want to keep helping. So
yeah, well, connect you to, you should talk to Sean Wells and then Dr. Walls. Have you ever talked to her about MS? But that'd be amazing. Talk to her because she's famous for reversing her, I think it's MS, but with her gut protocol and what she does, but
oh,
someone
interesting.
else look into. Yeah.
We're
So,
actually talking to MS Hope. Matthew Embry is, and his dad, Ashton Embry, who does all the scientific research, is quite excited about this for MS as well. So
look at the Walls protocol. You should talk to her.
okay, yeah, I will. I'd love to talk to you more too about all of your knowledge because there's some really deep biochemistry that I think you and I could get into offline.
Yeah. Well, you can come visit in San Diego and have some sunshine and
I love that.
come up to the hilltop here and have some warm weather.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Amy. We'll chat soon and hopefully everyone can check it out at the website and try the product out and see if you feel better energy wise and get those nutrients from the food you are eating.
Okay. Thank you so much, Debbie.